Hey Stitchers, before I get into the topic of this week's video, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you that posted lovely messages on my last YouTube video. I've now drawn the winners for the giveaway, all 7 winners, and they've all been notified, but I will list their names below in the description just in case for whatever reason they haven't checked their PMs or Instagram or anything like that. But a big thank you to all of you for leaving messages and comments. That was really great. So, the topic for today's video is Hardanger, and specifically the materials that you need to do Hardanger. So we're looking at any special tools, fabric and threads that are needed to get started with Hardanger. Now the information in this video is pitched at complete total novice level. So from the sort of point of view of somebody that might have seen Hardanger and thought, oh, that looks really lovely, I'd love to know where to start. I have no clue what I need in order to be able to do it. So that's the sort of level this is pitched at. So if you've been stitching Hardanger for years and years and years, then there isn't anything in this video that you won't already know, but obviously you are free to watch it should you wish. So I've been stitching Hardanger, well, I first found out about Hardanger, I've been stitching it since 2011. I find it's brilliant to do, especially the smaller pieces that I do as well as the larger ones. The small pieces only take, once you've got the hang of it and know what you're doing, they only take sort of an evening or so to stitch. So they stitch up really quickly and you feel like you've really accomplished something when you've finished it with all the different stitches that they use and the cut work and things like that that's used in Hardanger. It's quite effective. So they make really good cards if you're good at doing that type of thing, or gift tags, little small ones, coasters, all that type of thing that you've seen me do before in my videos. So that's why I like doing Hardanger, because it's interesting. You can use different colours and things to mix it up a bit. But to start with, one of the things I sort of consider when I'm thinking about taking on something new, a new craft, is, you know, what's it going to cost me in outlay for new stash and that type of thing. But with Hardanger, it's brilliant because there's quite a crossover between cross stitch and Hardanger. So you probably find if you're an even weave stitcher, you've got plenty of material in your stash that you'll be able to stitch Hardanger on. The difference might be with the threads, which we'll come on to later, but they're pretty easy to get hold of. And when you're starting out, you don't need hundreds of them. You don't need hundreds of them anyway. So the initial outlay for Hardanger is relatively small compared to perhaps other crafts, other sort of areas of needlework that you might want to get into. So first of all, are there any special tools that you need to do Hardanger? Not really. What you need is a very good pair of sharp scissors, or in my case, as I've already spoken about before in my tool tag video ages and ages ago, I use squizzers for my Hardanger. They're known as different things depending on where you live, but here in the UK they're known as squizzers, and you can buy them through so-and-so. Mabel Figworthy sells them on her site. So there's various places to buy them, and I'll link to them below. But if you have a really good, you know, sharp pair, fine, with a fine point of embroidery scissors, or you can get special Hardanger scissors. I like these because the point is very sharp and very fine, and it makes it easy to be accurate in your cutting, which is important with Hardanger. And of course these aren't just for Hardanger, you can use them in ordinary stitching to, you know, cut your threads and things like that. So it's not like they're a special purchase that you'll only use for Hardanger. You can use them in all areas of your stitching, really. The other thing you might need, depending on what size needles you use in your stitching, I use size 28 tapestry needles for everything apart from Hardanger, where you will probably need size 22 and size 24 tapestry needles. You need needles with a bigger eye because obviously pearl threads are thicker. Now the rule of thumb I go by, and lots of people go by, is for number 5 pearl you need a size 22 tapestry needle, and for number 8 pearl you need a size 24 tapestry needle. For number 12 pearl you can use number 26 tapestry needle, but to be perfectly honest I managed to stitch with number 12 pearl using a size 28 tapestry needle, but you know, it's probably, it doesn't wreck the thread or anything, it's fine, but if you want to do it properly you might want to use a size 26 tapestry needle. So that's really it. that's all the special equipment you need. A really good pair of sharp scissors and a few extra needles, so not a big deal really. As for how to stitch Hardanger, you can stitch it in a hoop, you can stitch it on a frame, you can stitch it in hand. I use all three methods depending on the type of stitches and the type of work that I'm doing with my Hardanger. Again, as with most things, it is absolutely personal preference. Some people don't necessarily like to use hoops, they don't necessarily want a really strong tension on their work, but some people like it. You know, it's entirely up to you. Nobody can say right or wrong what's the best way to do it. You know, the point of this video is just me sharing with you my experiences of Hardanger, the things that I use in my work. Obviously there's more than one way to do things, so I can only talk, and I'm only prepared to talk about the way I do things, because obviously I can't comment if I've not done it myself. I've got no experience or anything, no experience to draw on about how those things work if I don't do them myself. So fabric is the next topic. Now this is a really easy one actually. You can stitch Hardanger on just about any fabric that you would use for ordinary counted thread work, ordinary cross stitch. I've seen people use 18 count even weave, so Zweigart, Devosa, right their way up to some crazy people, and you know who you are if you're watching this, who decided that they would stitch their Hardanger on 40 count linen. Absolutely doesn't matter what fabric you pick, it's what's best for you. Personally, I like to use 25 count Lugana, as I find that is easy to see, and I just like the look of it. And I obviously use even weave. Lugana's an even weave. I have stitched Hardanger on linen, especially on band samplers and things like that. That's been 28 count linen. I just, for a full-on 100% Hardanger piece, I just like to use even weave, because obviously it's more even in nature. You don't have to worry about slubs and things like that, so I just prefer the more uniform look of stitching mine on even weave. But obviously it's entirely up to you what you decide to choose. So probably if you stitch Heaven on Earth designs, or if you just use even weave as a matter of course like I do, you more than likely have some 25 count, 28 count in your stash. Obviously 22 count Hardanger is perhaps a fabric you might associate with Hardanger, but as I say, it can be stitched on a more broader range of fabrics than that. You don't have to use 22 count Hardanger just because you're doing Hardanger. I think most of the examples I've shown you over my videos, over the course of my videos, most of them have been on 25 count Lugana, so you can see it works perfectly fine. So, you know, tools, pretty easy, fabric, pretty easy, nothing difficult there, nothing that will be new to you if you've been cross-stitching for some time. Now we move on to my favourite topic of threads. This bit could go on quite long, depending on how many threads I decide to show you, or not, as the case may be. Now Hardanger traditionally uses Perle threads, which you may not necessarily have come across if all you've done is cross stitch with stranded cotton DMC. But the good thing is that obviously Perle threads are made by DMC and Anchor, so they're two thread manufacturers that any cross stitcher will be familiar with. Obviously there's lots of other people that produce Perle thread as well, but we'll get onto them in a moment. Now if you've never stitched Hardanger before and you don't know if you're going to like it or not, then there's probably not much point in going out and buying a shed load of pearls until you know that it's something that you want to do. Now traditionally Hardanger is stitched white on white, so white fabric with white thread, sometimes ecru or cream possibly, depending on how traditional you want to be. So technically, if you're starting out in Hardanger, you only really need white Perle threads. You might only need 2, depending on what size fabric you're using and depending on what size pearl you're using. Now Perle threads come in several sizes. There's number 3 pearl, number 5 pearl, number 8 pearl, number 12 pearl. I've never used number 3 pearl. Number 3 pearl is the thickest pearl. Number 12 pearl is the finest pearl. Depending on what fabric count you use, tells you what size pearls you'll need to use for your particular design. That is what your size pearl is dependent upon, the fabric you choose to use. So if you decide that you want to stitch your Hardanger on either 22 count or 25 count, The general rule of thumb is that you will need a number 5 pearl and a number 8 pearl, because in Hardanger, pearls are used in pairs. So for 22 count and 25 count, number 5 and number 8. And for 28 count and above, you'll need number 8 pearl or number 12 pearl. That's traditionally, as a general rule of thumb, the size of pearl you need, which isn't to say that you can't use 5 and 8 on 28 count, but that's what I use, and that's what most of the Hardanger books will tell you are the right size pearl to use for that particular fabric. So sometimes it depends. You might have 28 count in your stash, so you'll use 8 and 12, or sometimes I work it the other way around. I might have some really nice matching pearls in 8 and 12, so then that dictates that I will stitch that piece of Hardanger on 28 count. So it's pretty flexible really. But ultimately, if you're just starting out in Hardanger, if you always know you're going to 25 count is your count of choice, then you'll only need 5 and 8. So, you know, one colour if you just want to stitch white on white. So Hardanger's pretty cheap to do, especially if you've got crossover with your cross stitch stash as well. So my stash started out with white pearls and a few DMC number 5 variegation pearls. Some people like to be traditional with Hardanger and just stitch white on white, as I say. Other people, like me, like to add a bit of colour in their Hardanger designs. So it's entirely up to you what you do, and that's a great thing about Hardanger. If you're not the type of stitcher that ordinarily chooses their own colours, perhaps you're not comfortable with that just yet and you like to stick to the chart, Hardanger, you're generally only using very few colours, so it's quite easy to pick your own colours really. So you might choose to use white for certain elements, and then you might pick perhaps your favourite colour to stitch other elements in. So it's quite a good way of personalising your designs, Hardanger is. If you're not quite ready yet to completely change out an entire cross stitch project with your own colours, Hardanger it's pretty easy to do that with, as you're only dealing with a couple of colours. So, pearl thread. Generally speaking, with one exception, which I'll show you in a minute, you use pearl thread as it comes off the skein, you don't split it. So, although it's applied thread in the sense that it's more than one thread twisted together, you use it as it comes. The same, the same for all sizes of pearl really, you just use it as it comes off the skein, off the ball. Number 5 pearl you can buy in balls, and if you're doing a lot of Hardanger, especially white, quite often you'll need balls and balls of it if you're doing a bigger piece. It does come in balls, but it's easier to find in skeins sometimes. And then number 12 and number 8 comes, depending on the manufacturer you buy from, but when you're talking DMC and Anchor, number 8 and number 12 generally come in balls. I forgot to look up exactly what colours are available in the different sizes of pearl, but I think off the top of my head you can buy a greater range of colours when you're talking about Anchor and DMC pearls in number 5 pearl, the thicker of the pearls that you need for Hardanger, than you can perhaps for number 12. And that can be sometimes where there's a difficulty, because if you need to use pairs of threads in Hardanger, so say for example number 5 and number 8, but you won't necessarily always be able to find the exact colour in both, because there's not the full range in all sizes of pearl. So that kind of depends on how you want to do your Hardanger, as I'll go on to show in subsequent videos. Personally, I find it is easier to use a coloured pearl for my thickest pearl, so if I'm stitching on 25 count as I do, I find it easier to use a number 5 pearl in a colour. And when I'm doing my filling stitches, so when you see the cut work and the little lacy filling stitches, if I'm stitching on white fabric, I find it easier to use a white pearl for my filling stitches, because it hides a multitude of sins that you wouldn't see in white, but you would see if you'd made mistakes in colour, or if you hadn't quite wrapped the full length of the bar or whatever. But I'll get onto that in subsequent videos. So, as I say, you can go as crazy as you like with threads, it's entirely up to you. But just to show you some Hardanger, so you know what I'm talking about. Your thicker pearl, whichever you decide to use depending on the count of your fabric, so in my case number 5 is generally the thickest pearl I use. that's the pearl that you use for your kloster blocks and for your satin stitch motifs. Obviously it depends on what the pattern says, go with the pattern, but generally if you're just looking at a Hardanger chart, that's what you go for. So when I say kloster blocks, I mean those little blocks there. All kloster blocks are basically 5 satin stitches stitched over 4. That's all they are, and they're just called kloster blocks. So those will be done in pearl number 5 if you're stitching on 25 count. This is a leaf satin stitch motif here. That one is stitched in number 5 pearl. And then the bar work, so where you can see here, those bars are woven. I think, yeah, those are woven. So then I'd use my finer pearl, number 8 pearl for that. And these filling stitches, these green filling stitches you can see, they're also in a number 8 pearl. So number 5 for your kloster blocks and satin stitches if you're using 25 count, and number 8 for your bar work and your filling stitches if you're using 25 count. So that's how it works. As for other threads you can use in Hardanger, more often than not I just use cotton pearls. You can get silk pearls and they are lovely to use, but I just don't think personally I would necessarily use them for Hardanger. I use them in like my chatelaines and just other types of stitching. So as I say, I started out with white pearls, and I got some variation pearls because, I mean, hand-dyed threads are all very well, but if you're not sure what you like, what you're going to use, there's no point splashing out and spending on them. But you might want something a bit different, a little bit of colour. So I think that the DMC sort of variegations and variations threads that you can get in a pearl are a really good option if you just want to do something a little bit different with your Hardanger, but you don't necessarily want to splash out on, you know, super duper hand-dyed threads. It's just kind of common sense really. So that's what I used the first time I was doing Hardanger. So I like to use those. Obviously as time went on, my stash of pearls grew, shall we say, and I know we've all seen it, but you know, that's like some of my collection of number 5 pearl. They're not in any particular order because when I stitch my Hardanger I choose by colour, not by number, so I don't find it necessarily important to have it all in numerical order. I just rummage through and pick out matching colours to what I sort of thought I want the design to look like in my head. I don't necessarily have matching DMC number 8s for all of those. I just sort of pick and choose with what I've got. I just work with the stash I already have. But obviously when you're first starting out, you want to buy a few little bits and pieces just to try out. But the great thing with DMC and Anchor is, as a cross stitcher, exactly the same numbers are used for your stranded threads as are used in the pearl threads. So say for example, you know your favourite colour of DMC is, I don't know, in my case, something purple, 333 or something like that. Then you can get the same colour possibly in a pearl thread, so you know the colour you're getting. So that's the good thing about using solids. It does cross over a bit from your DMC and Anchor stash. You know the colours, you're familiar with the colours if you've been stitching for a while, and so you know the colours you might like to use in your Hardanger. So that's a good thing about sticking with DMC and Anchor when you're first starting out. As you progress in Hardanger perhaps, or you think that yes, this is something I really enjoy doing and I want to build up my stash a little bit and get some more pearls, there are obviously hand-dyed pearls that you can get your hands on. There's quite a few different thread dyers, both independent and the big brands, that dye pearl threads. It's just a case of seeking them out. As I say, the difficulty often comes in trying to find matching threads in 2 sizes of pearl, because not all manufacturers will necessarily produce 5, 8 and 12 in the same colour. There are a few that do, which I will mention. But as for, you know, pearls that I have in my stash, I've got Threadworks pearls. I mean, this one's a number 12 over dye pearl. I've shown before some of the Steph Francis pearls that I've got, so those are hand-dyed pearls. Dinky Dyes do pearls, however I think they've discontinued doing their cotton pearls, which is such a shame, because as I say, I don't see the point in using silk pearls for Hardanger, but Dinky Dyes cotton pearls were lovely to use. So if you can get hold of them, they are they are really lovely to use. I mean, they're Dinky Dye threads, so of course they are. The only difference is for Dinky Dye threads, they don't necessarily state initially what size. They don't say this is a number 8 pearl, this is a number 5 pearl, this is a number 12 pearl. They use a different measurement, which I've spoken about before. So in Dinky Dyes threads, 100D is equivalent to a number 8 pearl, and a 600D is equivalent to a number 12 pearl. But if you look on so-and-so's website for the listings of pearls, it does tell you at the top, so it's not like it's something you're going to ever have to remember, but they just don't use necessarily the same measurement, shall we say. And the same is true for Gloriana Perles, although again they're silk pearls, so you wouldn't necessarily want to use them for Hardanger unless you're feeling particularly fancy. But as I've shown you before, Gloriana, you get Princess Perles, which are the equivalent to a number 5. So you can see they're quite thick. And then you get Petite Princess Perles, which are the equivalent to number 8. So that's those, and you can see they're slightly finer. But again, I mean, these are fancy threads. I don't think, I personally wouldn't necessarily use them for Hardanger. One of the first threads, hand-dyed threads that I use in Hardanger was Caron threads, and I love Caron threads. You're probably well aware of that by now. The good thing about Caron threads is if you stitch on 25 count, you will find they will have a matching number 8 pearl and a matching number 5 pearl, which is helpful. I mean, sometimes with variegated pearls, what you actually might want to do is use one variegated pearl, say in a number 5, and then for your number 8 pearl, for your filling stitches, you might pick a solid colour that matches in with your number 5 pearl. So for example, I just pulled this one out of my stash. This is Peacock number 18. This is Caron Watercolours, so this is the equivalent to a number 5 pearl. And this is the only pearl where you split it, because actually it's 3-stranded. So you can see there's 3 strands of pearl. You don't stitch with watercolours as it comes off the skein. You do actually divide it, but that's the only pearl thread that you do that with. That's Caron Watercolours. So for example, for this one, you might think, oh, I'd like to splash out on a hand-dyed thread for this particular piece of Hardanger. So you might think, well, I'll just buy this one, and then I'll pick out a solid blue to do my filling stitches and bar work, or you might just go for white like I often do sometimes, just to spread the cost a bit, or just be a bit more picky about the threads that you decide to use. So that's the watercolours, and the matching number 8 pearl is Wildflowers. I know I've spoken about these threads before in my cottons video, so you can see that they are matching, but the different cotton takes the dye differently, so they are slightly different in the way they look. So I love Caron threads. They've jumped up quite a bit in price though since I started doing Hardanger a few years ago. But they are lovely threads to work with, and they do, sometimes it's nice to use a special thread. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with obviously using solid DMCs and anchors. That's what the majority of my, I use some element of them in all my Hardanger. Somewhere along the line, because it keeps the cost down. Now, one of the only thread dyers that I know that dyes pearl threads in all three pearl threads that I would use for Hardanger, so number 5, 8 and 12, is Michelle at Jadry Designs, and she is happy to dye any of her regular cotton colours, and possibly some others, but you'd have to contact her, in all 3 sizes of pearl that you use for Hardanger. So this is the colour Tropical Bay. And I love that because it means that you've got options then. So you might think, oh, actually I want this design to be stitched on 28 count, so you can get the 8 and the 12. Or you might think, no, I'm going to go for 25 count or 22 count, so you need the 5 and the 8. So it just gives you more options that way. As I said, Dinky Dyes, those are Dinky Dyes silk pearl threads. Those are the only ones they sell now, which is a shame, as I said, as I wouldn't necessarily use silk. But I thought I'd just show you them anyway, because my video wouldn't be one of my videos without a bit of thread porn with it. So I think that is the basics for Hardanger. So special tools, just some different size needles and some sharp scissors, which you probably have in your stash anyway. Fabric, pretty much any sort of even weave or 22 count Hardanger will do the job, depending on what you feel is best for you. So the chances are, if you're an even weave stitcher, you've got some of that in your stash, so that's not a problem. Threads, as with everything, the world is your oyster. If, however, you splash out on pearl threads, or you have pearl threads in your stash and you're not sure what to do with, and Hardanger doesn't end up being the thing for you, there are other things you can do with your pearl threads. So for example, I use number 8 pearl and number 12 pearl for ordinary cross stitching and speciality stitches. I actually sometimes prefer using a variegated pearl thread for cross stitch, because it makes colour matching easier, because obviously you're dealing with a single strand, so where you cut is where you finish. You don't have to sort of worry about matching up colours, and also obviously you don't have to deal with railroading and making sure your stitches lie flat, because you're only dealing with one strand. So at the moment I am actually stitching something with a number 12 pearl in regular cross stitch, and I like using different thicknesses of thread for speciality stitches to get a different effect. Also, again, you're not struggling with trying to get 2 strands of thread to lay right if you're only using one. So do not fear if you have pearls in your stash that you're not going to use for Hardanger. There are other things you can do with them. And if you completely don't want to use them to stitch with, the other thing you can use them for, which I've done in the past, is to make like twisted cord for your ornaments and for making tassels. That's made with a number 5 pearl, which make, because it's thicker, they make really good tassels, and it's a lot easier to make twisted, well, I find it's a lot easier to make twisted cord out of them. So that's another thing you can do with pearl threads. So don't think that just because you end up thinking that Hardanger isn't actually for you, you can still use your pearl threads for different things. In fact, the reason why this ball of number 12 is looking a bit, well, worse for wear and a bit thin on the ground is because I also use that to lace my work. When I do my little stretch canvases and things like that, I'll use a pearl thread because it's stronger than stranded cotton, just to lace my work to mount board or whatever I happen to be using. So there's different things that you can use pearl threads for. So threads never go to waste, I find. In Stitcher's stash, there's always something you can use them for, even if you've got to think a little bit outside the box for it. So I suppose if you've never come across Hardanger before, there's quite a bit of information in that video. I feel like I've rattled through it quite quickly, and I've still been managing to talk for half an hour, and this was supposed to be a shorter video, but I think I've stayed on topic. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to. If there's anything I've left out, or you've got any questions to do with the materials for Hardanger and where to buy them, and if it's something I haven't written in the description below, then please just ask. You can, different ways to contact me, use the method of your choice. So I hope that has cleared up the mystery of any special stash you need for Hardanger, because the answer is, I'm hoping, if you're watching this, that you might have a bit of this, bits and pieces of this type of stash already. So if you have found this video to be helpful, please leave a comment. If it has been useful, then I will carry on and do further videos on Hardanger. I was thinking I could do a video on the basic stitches, maybe some stitch demonstrations, and also do a video just on, perhaps on cut work. I can tell you I won't be doing any videos, stitch tutorials on how to do Edelweiss stitches and things like complicated things, but basic elements of Hardanger I could probably manage if I tried hard enough. Sometimes it's quite difficult to video and film a stitch tutorial, but I'll see. If enough people want me to do it, then I will give it a go. So, there we go. That's the first Hardanger video. So, hopefully it's been helpful and clear. If it's not, please ask a question. I will be happy to help. So, thank you for watching and happy stitching.